guys, and welcome to today's class. In this class, I'm going to do the NSC November 2021, and my focus is on question 2 in this short clip. Information is very important that when you read it, understand it, and then you apply yourself. So, in completing it, we're told that there was 800,000 shares in issue on 1 March. There it was given. If you come to information C, we're also told that the share capital amount was 6.4 million. So I'll come here and I'll have my 6.4 million. Then they issued 100,000 new shares. It is given. But we are not told at which price they were issued at. So we cannot complete this part. But it is not a problem. Let's continue and then we come back to it. 30,000 shares were repurchased. So I'll come here and then I'll have my brackets and then I'll say 30,000 shares. This is shares repurchased. All right. And we need the average price. But here we are told they are repurchased at 120 more. Other papers would say above the average price. So we know that this amount is what goes to your retained income note number 8. So it cannot come here. I need the average price for this one. Now, we are going to get the amount here. So we will now take our calculators. On the calculator, we will now say my 800,000, I will now say my 800,000 number of shares at the beginning. Then I add 100,000, which was issued. And then I subtract the 30,000, which was repurchased. I end up with 870,000 shares at the end of the year. Once I have this, because there is no further movement or further issue of shares, I can then get my average price. I simply take my 7,395,000 and I divide it by 870,000 shares. So I'll say 7,395,000 and then I divide it by my 870,000 shares. And then it will give me 850. So I'll come here and then it's 850. Then I will now say my 30,000 shares multiply by 850. And then I'll end up with 255,000. 255,000, that is what I have there. So that is how I then get my amount for the repurchase of shares. I now need to get that amount up there, which is for the new issue. So I do the bottom up. I do the reverse of the signs. So I'll take my 7,395,000 and then I add the 255,000. I add the 255,000 instead of subtracting it because I'm now doing the opposite. So I add the 255 and then I subtract the 6.4 million. I subtract the 6.4 million and then it will give me my 1,250,000. That is how I'll then get this amount. Remember, this amount also goes to your cash flow statement under what? Financing activities. In the next videos, I'm going to show you how to record this amount. Okay, so what did I say? Once the repurchase of shares is the last aspect here, you can get your average price here at the bottom and then you go all the way up. Now, the next item that we are going to calculate is financial indicators. Very important, very key, that you know your formulas. Know your formulas on your fingertips. Know your formulas. Even though you can use the formula sheet, but do not over-rely on the formula sheet. Know your formula sheet. Know where to find your formulas, but do not over-rely on it. Know your formulas by heart. So here we're saying it's going to be operating expenses on sales. So my operating expenses is 1,458,600. And then I'm going to divide this by sales, which is 7,293,000. And then I multiply this by 100 over 1. Okay, so if you punch that in your calculator, you are now saying 1,458,600. And then I divide that by 7,293,000. Okay, and then that will give you your 20%. So the answer here becomes 20%. Okay, this one was an easy one. Okay, yeah, we can say this one was an easy one. But let's see the next one, dividend per share. This is your DPS now. I know some of you will take the amount in note 8, that is your retained income, the owner share dividends amount, if it's given, and then you would divide it by the number of shares at the end. That may not be the right way. Why? Because at times when there is a change in the number of shares, you have to calculate the dividend per share individually. You have to calculate it individually. In other words, you have to calculate your interim dividend separately and your final dividend separately. So we can say if I get my interim dividend per share plus my final dividend per share, that is equal now to my dividend per share, which is what I want to calculate here. Now, I'm not given my interim dividend per share, I'm given the interim dividend that was paid. So I can take the interim dividend which was paid, which is 162,000. Then I divide that by the number of shares that were in issue on 30 September. How many shares were there? On 1 March, we had 800. On 30 June, we issued 100,000 new shares. And then in between, in between June and January, before the repurchase, that's when we paid the interim dividend. That means we had 900,000 shares. So I divide this by 900. So I'll come here and I'll say it is my 162,000. I divide that by my 900,000 shares. And then that will give me 18 cents. So it gives me 18 cents. I have my interim dividend per share. I then add this now to my final dividend per share, which is 22 cents, here, and it will give me 40 cents. Very, very important. At times, the examiner will not demand the dividend per share. At times, they want you to calculate just the interim dividend per share. At times, they want you to calculate just the final dividend per share. But in this case, they wanted us to calculate the dividend per share. And we had to take the interim that we calculated plus the final that was given. Remember, guys, continue to practice and watch out for the next lesson that is going to come. Until next time, cheers.